Masechet Gittin, Daf Non He, New Mishnah, continuing the theme of enactments that the rabbis made for Tikkun Ha'olam. Ha'id Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda al ha'chereshet she'si'a abiha shehi yose'a beget. There's a couple of situations where it's difficult for a woman to be married, to do kiddushin, because she lacks da'at. One is chereshet and one is ketana, which we're going to see in the next clause. So a woman who is deaf, here's the problem. In order to be married, to do kiddushin, the woman has to accept it. So she needs da'at to know that she is entering into kiddushin. A deaf woman cannot do that, and therefore, if someone does kiddushin with a deaf adult woman, that marriage would only be d'Rabbanan. However, here we're talking about a case where she was a deaf girl who was a minor, and her father accepted kiddushin on her behalf. Any minor girl can have that done. The father will accept kiddushin. Since the father has da'at, that kiddushin is valid mid'oraita. Good. So now they're fully married. She grows up and she's an adult. That's fine. But let's say they want to get divorced. So now a father cannot accept a divorce on behalf of his grown daughter. So can she accept a divorce paper? The answer is yes. The reason is because for get, we do not need a da'at of the acceptance of the woman, whereas kiddushin, the bride has to agree. For a get, it could be even given against her will. Therefore, she doesn't need will, she doesn't need da'at, as long as she holds the get and he gives it to her, or goes into her domain, they are fully divorced. So even though they're married deoraita, a chereshet can still accept a get, and that will work mid-deoraita. ועל קטנה בת ישראל שנישאת לכהן שוחדת בתרומה והיא מתה בעלה יורשה. Now a minor girl, we're talking about a case where she's orphaned from her father. So if the father was alive, then there would be kiddushin deoraita, there would be no problem. But if the father is not alive, a minor girl can still be married off by her mother or by her older brother. But that is only kiddushin mid'Rabbanan. Nevertheless, if she's married, she's a bat Yisrael, but she marries a kohen. So just like a wife of a kohen, any of the household of a kohen can eat terumah, she can also eat terumah. So we consider, even though this marriage is only d'Rabbanan, but the rabbis consider it like a full marriage, such that she is sufficiently a wife that she can eat terumah. We're going to see in the Gemara, we'll discuss real terumah deoraita, or the terumah itself is only d'Rabbanan, but it seems from the simple reading of the Mishnah that, the rabbis have that power for tikkun olam, and they say, you were considered his full wife. And furthermore, they're fully married also to the extent that if she brings property into the marriage and then she dies, so the law in general for any marriage is that the husband inherits her estate. And this will be true in this case as well, that even though the marriage is only mid'Rabbanan, nevertheless the biblical laws of inheritance apply, and he will inherit her property. So again, the rabbis say this marriage is good. Once the rabbis say that, we consider it like a full marriage. ועל המריש הגזול שבנו בבירה שיטול את עמיו מפני תיקון תקנת השבים. And so if someone steals a beam, right? I go to Home Depot, I steal a beam, and I go and build a building with that beam right in the middle of it. And so now they come and say, hey, you have to return the beam. So really, from the letter of the law, I am required to give back the beam. Since it's still in existence, I would have to destroy the whole house and give back the beam. But because of takanat hashavim, we want to encourage people to do teshuvah. If the thief says, I really want to make teshuvah, I have a spiritual awakening, I want to be a good person, but wait a second, I'm going to have to destroy this whole house in order to do that. You know what? Forget it. I'm not going to make teshuvah. So therefore, the rabbis made a takana. It says, listen, if you already used the beam and it's in the middle of your house, then you just have to pay for the amount that the beam is worth, and you don't have to give the beam itself. So that way people will be encouraged to make teshuvah. ועל חטאת הגזולה שלא נודעה לרבים שהיא מכפרת מפני תיקון העולם. If a robber steals an animal and then offers it as a chatat the chatat is not for stealing, You don't bring a chatat for stealing on purpose, but the chatat is for something else. He violated Shabbat by mistake. So really, a stolen animal should not be usable for a sacrifice. Nevertheless, if it was not known, publicly known, that this is a stolen animal, then the rabbi said, "Mipnei tikun hamizbeach," for the benefit of the mizbeach, that this will atone. The Gemara will explain precisely what this means. And however, if it is known to the public that this is a stolen animal, then that's really not. Then it's not okay, right? We can't allow it. Allow that public reputation that we're offering stolen sacrifices on the altar. All right. Amar Rava, me'eduto shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda, amar la'edim, reu get ze shani noten la, v'chazar v'amar la, kinsi shetar hobze, hare zo megoreshet. Rava says we can infer from the first case of this testimony that we read in the Mishnah by Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda, that let's say a husband, goes to witnesses and says, listen, look at here's a get that I'm about to give my wife. Now, so to give a get, you have to give a get in front of witnesses, and the witnesses have to also know what type of document, what's going on in this transaction here. So he says that to the witnesses, but without the wife hearing. Then he goes to the wife and says, here, I'm giving you an IOU. So he's doing this because he wants to trick his wife, and he's kind of embarrassed to say, "Here, I'm giving you a get," because then she's gonna get upset and say, "How dare you divorce me?" Whatever. He doesn't want to get involved. He wants her to accept it, and then he's going to run away. So he goes to his wife and say, "Here's an IOU." She says, "Oh, thank you for the IOU." She opens it up. It turns out it was a get. That works, even though she's accepting a document and she doesn't even know what it is. Still, it works. Now, how do we know? How does Rava infer this from our Mishnah? Mi lo amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgoda la ba'inan data hachaname la ba'inan data. Because after all, in the first case in the Mishnah, he said a husband can give a get to his wife who is deaf, meaning she has no da'at, and even though she doesn't know what this is, nevertheless, it's a valid get. So here also, we don't need her to know what it is, and it will still be good, right? A woman can get divorced against her will, even without her knowledge. She just has to accept a document, physically accept it, and then it works. So that's Rava's inference. Now we ask, Peshita, that's obvious. Why do you even have to teach it? Teach that to us. You might have thought that in the case of a deaf woman, he's just giving it to her. He's saying nothing. Doesn't matter if he says anything. She wouldn't hear it anyway. So she's just accepting something. And okay, it's a get, so it works. But in this case, you might think it's worse because he's saying to his wife, this case she can hear, here is an IOU. So you might have thought that because he says here's an IOU, he is nullifying the get, because he's saying this is not a get, it's an IOU. So I might think that it would be worse and it would not work. So that's why Rava comes to teach us, Kamash Malan, im ita debatle la'edima va'amar lehu v'haida kamarachim ishum kisufa. No, if his intention was to, in fact, to nullify the get, he would have had to tell the witnesses that something else, that this is not a get, I'm giving her an IOU. If he told the witnesses that, then it would in fact be nullified, because the witnesses do have to know that this is a get. However, since he told the witnesses this is a get, and he only told the wife that it's an IOU, then we understand that his intention was not to nullify the get, but rather he was just embarrassed to give a get to his wife, and so he wanted to say, here's an IOU, and then he can run away and not be embarrassed that he's divorcing his wife. Okay, Ve'al ketana bat Yisrael. The second clause in the Mishnah says that if a mother or older brother marry off a minor girl, even though it's the Rabbanan type of marriage, nevertheless, she can eat terumah. We consider it like a full marriage. Ve'ilu chareshet lo achla. Now, notice that the first case in the Mishnah was about chareshet, and then it changes and uses an example of a ketana. Both of them are the Rabbanan types of marriages. So why not stick with the same law, the same case of Hareshet, and say it's talking about, and say the same law, that if someone marries a Hareshet, then still she eats teruma. Why not say the same thing? So the truth is that the rabbi said if someone marries a cheresh, it will consider also that it's a Rabbanan type of marriage, and really she could also eat teruma. We're going to consider it like a full marriage. However, if we allow that in chereshet, then people will come to think that if the man is a cheresh, then he could also do that. Now, a man who's a cheresh, he doesn't have da'at to give to give kiddushin, and so that's even the lower level. There's some kind of connection there. But it's not a full marriage, and in that case she would not eat teruma. So therefore we cannot allow a hareshet, even if she's married to a hearing man, to eat teruma, because then if they're both deaf, we might think that it would be that she could eat teruma then also, and that is not allowed. Now we ask, why should it not be allowed? V'lechul katan ochel nevelotu. Why? So let her eat teruma. It's the same as a minor who eats non-kosher meat. A minor, a child, you're not allowed to feed a child non-kosher food. But if the child is eating it on his own, you don't have to stop them. And it should be the same for a cheresh who also doesn't have da'at. So if she eats teruma, so what? Let her eat teruma. Why do we have to stop it? So gezerah shema yachil cheresh bepikachat. Oh, further gezerah, if you have a man who is deaf and his wife is hearing, so then he does this, he does some kind of kiddushin, but it's not a valid kiddushin mideoraita. And in that case, we will think, oh, I know that other couple that they're both deaf, and they let her eat teruma, and they're going to think it's allowed, and they'll think in this case also it's allowed. But in this case, there's no leniency whatsoever, because she is a pikachat, she's a regular full a woman with full knowledge, and she is not allowed to be given teruma. She can't eat teruma. So and then she may come to equate her case with the other cases and eat teruma as well. Therefore, when it comes to, because of this one case of a deaf man and a hearing woman in which she would be liable, so she certainly can't eat teruma, we're going to prohibit even when she is deaf and he is deaf, and also prohibit even when she is deaf and he is not. All these cases, we have to not allow teruma, and so that's why the Mishnah only permits it in the case of a minor girl who is married off by her mother or brother. Now, v'lecho b'teruma derabanan. Wait a second. Why not let, in all these cases of a deaf woman, allow her to eat teruma? That's only midrabanan. There's certain cases where on the doraita level you don't have to take teruma, but the rabbis say you have to take teruma. So since these marriages are okay midrabanan, let her eat teruma derabanan. And the answer is gezer hashema atela achule b'teruma deoraita. People, it's hard for them to distinguish between the Oraita and the Rabbanan levels of Teruma, and if they see, oh look, you're eating the Rabbanan Teruma, people will get confused, and then they'll have these women eat Teruma de Oraita, and therefore the rabbis make their ban across the board. Okay, Va'al Hamerish Hagazul Shebena'o, the next case about the beam that someone steals, that you don't have to destroy the house, you could just return the beam to encourage people to make teshubah. Tenora banan, gazal merishu b'na'o babira, bet shamai omrim mekakeya kol habira kula, umahazir merish lebe'alav. Ubet Hillel omrim en lo ela deme merish bilvad, mishum takanat hashavim. Here's a tosefta that says, actually, this is a subject of a machloket. Bet Shammai says that you in fact have to destroy the entire building and return the beam. I mean, it's true in general when you steal something and then let's say you steal a sandwich and you eat it, so then you can't return the sandwich, so then obviously you'd have to return the monetary value and double. But if the thing is in existence, then you have to return the actual item. You should have thought twice about building a house upon a beam that you stole. So Bet Shammai says, letter of the law, you have to return it. Bet Hillel says, no, just pay for the monetary value, even though Bet Hillel agrees from the letter of the law you have to return the item, but then that will be prevent people from making teshuvah. And so better that we should override the letter of the law and still the person who's the victim of the theft will still get the monetary value, and that way the person can keep his house and make teshuvah. Ve'al hatata gezula. Now the more complicated case of a stolen animal, as long as it's not known to the public that it was stolen, so the rabbis declare that it works. It's mechaper. The one who brings that chatat, he fulfills his obligation. He doesn't have to bring another chatat, the robber. Amar ula. So we're going to see two interpretations. Devar Torah ben nod'a ben lo nod'a ena mechaperet. So what's the deoraita law, and then what's the tikkun? So according to ula, according to the deoraita level of the law, whether it's known to the public that it was stolen, or whether it's not known to the public whether it's stolen, it doesn't matter. This does not affect atonement. Why? My tama, Yehush kedi la kaneh. So, because when the robber steals something, the owner of the item, at some point, he still owns it, right? Technically, even though it's in the hands of the robber, he's not the proper owner. The real owner still owns it until the owner has yeush, is step one. Yeush means he says, I'm never gonna find it again, and so he forgets about it. He despairs of ever finding it. However, according to Ula, the despair of the owner is only one step, does not yet give ownership over to the robber. The robber, in order for it to be fully acquired and out of the hands of the owner, the robber would have to either do something to it, change it in some way, or transfer ownership to someone else, like sell it again. If it changes hands again, then the yeush plus an act, then it's no longer belongs to the owner. But despair by itself doesn't give it to the robber. Therefore, the robber doesn't actually have ownership of it. So why doesn't it mechaper? Because the owner is giving a sacrifice that he doesn't own, and you can't do that. I can't sanctify someone else's animal and bring it, right? It's not sanctified because I don't have a right to it. It's not mine. So I can't possibly bring it as a sacrifice, and therefore I'm just bringing someone else's animal, and they're sacrificing it. So that impossible. There's no way that can work on the Doraita level. However, nevertheless, the rabbis made a very, very bold takana overriding this Doraita law, and they say that as long as it's not well known, right, that only the robber knows, and maybe and I guess the owner knows that it was stolen, and so if it's not known in public, then the rabbis come and say this animal will effectuate atonement for the one who brought it, that is the robber. Why? So that the Kohanim will not be distraught. You see, if there's a possibility that some of the animals that are coming to the Kohanim might be stolen, they're getting thousands and thousands of animals that people are bringing for a chatat or for any kind of animal. And if among them there's some robbers, now here's the problem. If you take an animal that's cholin, it was not sanctified, and any stolen animal is going to be cholin, because it was never sanctified, because it has to be yours to sanctify it. So anybody out there who's a robber who brings cholin, and now the Kohanim are going to do shechita on this cholin in the azara and bring it as a sacrifice, that is a serious prohibition of karet, and the animal cannot be used, and then the Kohanim are going to offer it and eat it. The Kohanim eat part of the animal, which is also prohibited. So the Kohanim are going to be distraught about bringing animals. They're going to worry every time, maybe this animal's stolen. You know what? We don't want to bring any sacrifices because we don't want to get in trouble. And so that's why the rabbis, in order to make sure that the Kohanim will not be distraught, they override this Deoraita law. On the Deoraita level, this animal is non-consecrated, and you're violating the serious prohibition of bringing a non-consecrated animal into the temple and slaughtering it. But the rabbis override all that, and they say, you know what? It's a good sacrifice. It even fulfills the obligation of the robber who brought it. And we do all that so the Kohanim will feel at ease that any sacrifices that they're bringing will be fine. Now, they only need to do this if it's not known. If it's known that this was stolen, then the Kohanim will say, wait a second, I recognize you. You're a thief. I recognize this animal. It was on a wanted poster, right? Anybody see my cow? Right, here's a picture of it. It was stolen. So they'll know, they'll see it, and they'll say, oh, this is a stolen one. We're not going to sacrifice it. So if it's known, there's no need for the rabbis to make this takana, only if it's not known to the public. Okay, question. Amri le Rabbanan de'ula v'ha'anan mipnei tikun hamizbeach. Tenan. Amar lehen kevan tekohanim asibin nimsa mizbeach batel. So the rabbis asked Ula, wait a second, and the Mishnah says it's because of the benefit of the altar, and according to you, it should be for the benefit of the Kohanim, right? Why does it say the benefit of the altar? How does it help the altar to make this takana? And Ula explained to them, yeah, it is indirectly helps the altar, because if the Kohanim are distraught, then they're not going to want to bring any sacrifices, and then the Mizbeach will be idle, because the Kohanim are not bringing any sacrifices, and that will be bad for everything. And so therefore, it is a takana for the Mizbeach by helping the Kohanim feel at ease that any korban you bring, you'll be all right. Okay, all that is one explanation of Ula. Now we have an opposite explanation. V'Rav Yehuda amar, devar Torah ben nod'a ben lo nod'a mechaperet, mai ta'ama yeush kedi kaneh. According to Rav Yehuda, as long as the owner despairs of ever finding it again, right, and eventually after, a certain amount of time, a couple of days, he's like, you know what, that animal's gone, I'm never going to get it back again. Once he says that, once he thinks that, then the robber actually acquires ownership of it, right? He owns the animal. Now, of course, he still has to pay back the owner. He'll have to pay double, and for an animal, he'll have to pay 4 or 5 times. So he still has to pay it back, but physically, the animal does belong to him. Since the animal belongs to the robber, when he makes it consecrated, it is a valid consecration, and when he offers it, it's a valid offering. And therefore it atones. And that would be true whether it's known to the public or not known to the public. It doesn't matter. Legally, it's his. Nevertheless, the rabbis came and they nullified it if it's known to the public, because this is bad PR. The people will say, oh, look, I know that animal. That animal was stolen. And look, the Kohanim, they're putting it on the Mizbeach. See, on the Mizbeach, they put stolen property, and this is going to look bad. So we don't want that to happen, and therefore the rabbis, to protect the honor of the Mizbeach, say that if it's known to the public, we're not going to allow it. If it's not known to the public, and maybe only a couple of people know about it, so then we can let it go, because technically the robber now does own it, and we'll deal with the robber separately. We'll make him pay for what he stole. But the animal technically is his, so yes, it can, if it's private, we'll let it go. Now we're going to ask a few questions on each of these opinions. We understand, according to Ula, why they chose a hatat as an example of it, because a hatat, the Kohanim eat part of it, and so therefore the Kohanim are going to be distraught because they don't want to eat something that they're not allowed to eat, and so they're going to be definitely distraught. So they'll be the most distraught about a hatat. But according to Rav Yehuda, why they pick a hatat? Afilu ola name, even if it was an ola, also they would have the same concern, and because an olah is even more, because olah is the whole thing is burnt on the mizbeach, and so that will cause negative PR to the mizbeach even more than a chatat. A chatat, only a few parts of the animal are burnt on the mizbeach. And so we answer, Lami baya ka'amar, Lami baya olah dechalil hi, ela afilu chatat nameh, techele vedam hu desalik legabe mizbeach, ve'idach kohanim achlele, afilu hachi gezur, shelo yomeru mizbeach ochel gezeros. Says, you're right. It would be olah or chatat. And the Mishnah is saying a case of this, and of course that. So don't say only an olah. That's for sure, because an olah is fully consumed by the mizbeach. And surely people will say, oh, that olah was stolen, and look, they put the whole thing on the mizbeach. And so certainly we would make a gezerah for that. But not only for an olah, we want to apply this gezerah also to a hatat. Even though you're only putting the cheleb, parts of the fat, and the dam, that goes up on the mizbeach. The cheleb actually is burnt on the mizbeach, the dam is sprinkled on the mizbeach, and the rest of it, the kohanim are eating it. So I might have thought, well, maybe this is not so bad. Since the kohanim eating it, doesn't look so bad to the mizbeach, where only a little bit of the animal goes on the mizbeach. Nevertheless, even here, the rabbis would make a gezerah, and they don't want people to say that the mizbeach eats even part of a stolen animal. And so now we explained it according to both. Good. Now a challenge. Tenan. Al hatat hagezula shelo nod'a larabim she mechaperet mipnei tikun ha'olam. This is a quote from our Mishnah. Bishlama le'ula anicha. This makes sense according to Ula. The language fits perfectly. That regarding a chatat that was stolen and people didn't know about it, the rabbis made a gezerah that it is mechaper. Made a takana rather that it is mechaper because tikkun hamizbeach. Really, from the letter of the law, this is not good because the robber didn't own it, couldn't have sanctified it, and therefore it's not a valid sacrifice. But the rabbis made a takana that if as long as people don't know about it, it will be mechaper. So that fits the language perfectly. Ela Rav Yehuda ipecha miba'ele. According to Rav Yehuda, it should have said the opposite. It should have said that chatat gezula that's known to the public, the rabbis made a takana that it's not mechaper, because according to Rav Yehuda, from the letter of the law, it's always mechaper, because Yeush by itself gives over ownership, and so therefore the rabbi made it consecrated, it's a valid consecration, it's a valid sacrifice, and the rabbis said it's not mechaper if it's known to the public, so it should have said it that way. And so we answer, Hachinami ka'amar, lo noda mechaperet, noda na mechaperet mipnei tikun ha'olam. Either you add these words to the Mishnah, or these words are just implied, is what it means to say. If it's not known, then it will be mechaper. That's the letter of the law. If it's known, that's where the rabbi stepped in and said, we're not going to accept it. I'm going to make him bring another one for the reputation of the Mizbeach. Okay, good. Now a challenge. Mativ Rava. Ganav v'hikdish v'achar kach tabach u'machar. משלם תשלומי כפל ואינו משלם תשלומי ארבעה וחמישה ותענה עלה בחוץ כי הגוונה אנוש כרת והיא אמרת ייאוש כדי לקנה כרת מי עבידתה. So this is a challenge to Ula, who said that ייאוש by itself does not give ownership. That was the first opinion. And the case is as follows. The robber steals an animal, then makes it hekdesh. Now remember, this is according to Ula that says Yeush does not give him ownership. So this Hekdesh that he did is not a valid Hekdesh because he doesn't actually own it yet to make it Hekdesh. After he makes it Hekdesh, he goes and he slaughters it and sells it. Now that's the other law, that if someone in a regular case of a robber who steals something and slaughters it or sells it without the hikdish, he's going to have to pay 4 or 5 times. Okay, but in this case, he's hikdish in the middle. So what happens? So he has to pay double, but he does not have to pay 4 or 5 times. You see from the Mishnah itself, we're considering that hikdish as if it's a valid hekdesh, and that's why he doesn't have to pay. That's why he only pays double, not 4 or 5. Because if he steals it and makes it hekdesh, then when he does slaughtering or selling it, he's slaughtering or selling an animal that's no longer his. It belongs to hekdesh, and so that's why he doesn't pay 4 or 5. So you see already from the Mishnah that we're not considering this. Where we are considering this hekdesh to be a good hekdesh, right? Because the yeush is valid. But we add yet another level to this question, that there's a braita about this Mishnah that says if you slaughter this type of animal outside the Bet HaMikdash, you are liable to karet, because if you take any sanctified animal and slaughter it outside, then that's a punishment of karet. So we see from the Mishnah and from this braita that we're considering this hekdesh to be real hekdesh. You, Ula, you said that Yeush by itself does not give ownership to the robber, and therefore the robber doesn't own it. So the hekdesh should not be a good hekdesh. There should be no karet in such a case. So what's the answer? Amarav Shizbi Karet midivrehem. Oh, when we says karet here in this Beraita, it's talking about the Rabbanan karet. Now, what do you mean, Drabanan karet? Achichu ale karet medivrehem mi'ika. So his colleagues, when they heard this the answer of Rav Shizbi, they started laughing at him. This is very serious. There's only a few times in the whole Shas that one rabbis laugh at someone else, and this is very deprecating, right? It's not only wrong, but it's like laughable. It's a ridiculous answer. Ridiculous because karet is punishment midei shamayim. Hashem will cut that person off. But so how could you say midrabanan? The rabbis don't do anything, right? If you can say you're liable to a penalty, a fine, midrabanan. There could be doraita fine or drabanan fine. Drabanan fine means the court says you have to pay this. That makes sense. But how could you say a drabanan punishment that comes from heaven, right? It doesn't make any sense. Rava gives rebuke to those sages who were laughing and says, a great rabbi said this, right? Rav Shizbi, he's a great rabbi. Don't laugh at it. Maybe you just misunderstood what he said. Here's how it works. There is karet, as a result of something that the rabbis did. The rabbis said that we're going to consider this animal to be his. The rabbis have a right to do that. Hefker beti and hefker. And so their rabbis say, even though on the doraita level, the robber, the animal does not belong to the robber because Yeush by itself does not transfer ownership. Nevertheless, the rabbis want him to be liable, right? Because he went and stole an animal, did all these terrible things. So we want to make him liable. Therefore, the rabbis say we transfer ownership away from the owner to the robber. Now the robber, at the time that he makes it hekdesh, does own it. And therefore, he gets karet if it's when he slaughters it, he's slaughtering it outside of the mikdash. Now he's a hayav karet. So it's not that the rabbis give him karet. The rabbis don't have a power to create karet, but they do have the power to transfer ownership. Once it's his, it really is his. Then when he slaughters it, he gets karet. Right? So it's really brilliant. Rav Shizbi, he was saying it, karet medivrehem, he was saying it in a short form, but you have to look deeply into his words to understand what he meant. It's karet as a result of the hefker betin hefker, which is medivrehem. But once they do that, then it can effectuate something on a deoraita level. All right, brilliant. Amar Rava. Havadai kami ba'yali. Now, a follow-up to that, Rava is the one that defended Rav Shizbi, but now he has a follow-up question. Ki okmu harabanan b'shuteh mishat geneva or mishat hektesha. When I just explained Rav Shizbi that they transfer ownership to the robber, when do they do that? Is it retroactively from the time that he stole it, or from the time that he makes it hekdesh? You see, it's only gonna trigger when he makes it hekdesh, because that's where the rabbis say we want him to get punished. But the question is, does it become his right at that moment, or retroactively it could be some days before when he actually stole it? What difference would it make? He's going to get karet either way. If he slaughters it after that hekdesh, it makes a difference for its wool and its offspring. In other words, during those few days while the robber has it, before he makes it hekdesh and before he slaughters it, it might give birth. Maybe it was a pregnant cow and gives birth to a child, or it might be a sheep and he shears the sheep and has the wool. Who is the legal owner of the offspring and that wool? Well, if he owned it, if retroactively they made it his from the time of stealing it, then since it's his, the wool and the offspring belong to the robber. On the other hand, if they make it his, hefker betin hefker, only from the time of that he makes it hekdesh, then the offspring and the wool that came from it beforehand were not his, because at that time it was not under his ownership. So that's what the difference will make. That's the difference between these two sides of his question. So what's the answer? Rava himself thought about it more, and he said, Mistaberam mishat hekdesha shelo yeheh choteh niskar. It makes sense that it would only be his from the time of hekdesh on, so that the sinner should not profit from the crime. If the rabbis, the goal of the rabbis is to transfer ownership to make him liable to karet, even though it looks like the rabbis are hurting the owner because they're taking it away from the owner, but really they're doing it to punish the sinner, and the robber still is going to have to pay the owner, so the owner's not going to lose out. So we want to punish him. We don't want him to also benefit. And if we would make it his retroactively from the time of from stealing it, then the offspring and the wool would legally belong to the robber. And so we don't want him to benefit from the sin, and therefore it makes sense that they only made it hekdesh from the time of only made it his from the time of Hekdesh and on. We now begin the next Mishnah that will lead into the famous stories about the destruction of Jerusalem. Lo haya sikadikon bihuda baharuge milchama. Meharuge milchama hamilchama ve'elach yesh ba sikadikon. Sikadikon comes from a Latin word sicarii, that means a short dagger that these assassins would use. These would be Romans or other bad people. Sometimes Jews use them also, some Jewish thugs that would use these to go and kill or threaten their political enemies or other enemies. So during the law of Sicarii, which we'll see in just a second, did not apply in Judea during the time of those killed in war. Meaning at the very bad time of the war and people were being killed, the law did not yet apply. However, afterwards, after the killing stopped, in the aftermath of the war, then rabbis instituted the law regarding Sicarii. Let's see what it is. Kesad. Lakach misikarikon vechazav velakach mibal habayit. Mikacho batel. Mibal habayit vechazav velakach misikarikon. Mikacho kayam. I was going to explain that during the time of the war itself, the Sicarii would go and they would threaten people with their lives and take their land. At that time, because people would rather live than keep their land and die, so they said, okay, fine, take the land. And so that, it was a forced sale or gift, but nevertheless it was done with full agreement. You can't say full agreement because it was forced, but they said, yes, okay, you take the land. So it really belonged legally to the thieves. However, kind of like we said before, if someone has yeush and then the thief takes it, the person has despairs, so it belongs to the thief. That is rightfully his, he still has to pay back and so on, but we're just talking about who is the legal owner. So at the time of the war, when they threatened their lives, people would give up their houses. Yes, take my house, and they really meant it to take the house, so it belongs to the Sicarii. In that case, if it belongs to the Sicarii and someone else comes in and buys it from the Sicarii, then it's a valid sale because the original owner gave up the right to it. However, this law, the law of the Sicarii, happened afterwards when they weren't actually threatening their lives fully. So the Sicarii come and they forcibly kick the guy off the land, take his land, but the owner never gave up ownership, right? He did not despair. He says, I'm going to get my land back. And therefore the Sicarii, while they are squatting on the land, do not really own it. Now these Sicarii, they're not interested in living on this land, right? They're living somewhere else. They have no interest in actually keeping it. They just steal it so that they can sell it, probably at a lower price than the market. And so this is just their way of stealing a lot, because if you just steal someone's cash, that'll just be, $100. If you steal their house, then you could sell it for a lot of money. Now, if a Sicarii steals someone's house, and now someone else wants to come and buy the house, here's the problem. He has to, on the one hand, pay off the Sicarii, otherwise the Sicarii is not going to give it to him. On the other hand, the Sicarii is not the legal owner, so he has to also pay the original owner. Now, it makes a difference what order he does this in. If he first buys from the Sicarii and then goes and pays the rightful owner, the original owner, then it's not a good sale, because You pay the Sicarii. Sicarii says, okay, take it. The Sicarii has the might, but not the right. The original owner has the right, but not the might. So you took care of the might, and so now it's mine. When I go to, I have possession of it, but it's not legally mine yet. When I go and buy it from the original owner has no choice because he can't get it back anyway. So he's kind of forced into saying, okay, fine, take it, but he doesn't really mean it. Since he doesn't mean it, it's not a valid sale. However, if again the Sicarii steals your land, and then so you're out, you don't have money to buy it back from the Sicarii. If I first go to you, the legal owner, and I say, listen, I'd like to buy the land. I'll pay you for it. You're the rightful owner, and you agree. If you agree to that before I go to the Sicarii, now that means it's full agreement. It's not forced upon you. So I buy it from you. Now I am the legal owner. I still have to buy off the Sicarii to leave. Then that's a valid sale. Okay, so that's the law of the Sicarii, that I actually have to buy it from both you and the Sicarii, but I have to make sure I get your agreement first. Now here's an analogous law, nothing to do with times of war, just a regular case of a husband and wife. And the wife has land that she brings into the marriage or is promised to her. So let's say you're married to this woman. She has land that she owned and she brought in. While they're married, he's controlling it, even though it still belongs to her. And at the end of the marriage, it'll go back to her. So let's say I want to buy it. So I have to get permission from both the husband and the wife. Now, but the order matters. If I buy it from the husband first, husband agrees, yeah, okay, you can have it. And then I go and buy it from the wife is going to feel forced. What is she going to go now and fight with her husband and say, hey, I didn't want to buy it. I didn't want to sell it. Why did you sell it? So she's going to say yes, just to acquiesce, to make peace, but she's not really going to mean it. Since she doesn't mean it, the sale is void. On the other hand, if I go to the wife first, because she is the rightful owner, and I ask her, hey, do you mind if I buy it? And she agrees. It's totally legal. No one's being forced to do anything. They're getting money for it. Listen, I would like to buy it, and this is going to be the price. And she agrees. Then I can go to the husband, who, while they're married, is controlling it, and buy it from him, have his acceptance. Then it's a valid sale. Zo Mishnah Rishona. All that was the original law regarding the Sicarii. That was the original law that. So now we're going back to the Sicarii case. The original law was that if I want to buy land that was stolen by Sicarii, I have to pay both, but I have to pay the landowner first, and then I pay off the Sicarii. However, here's the takana. Betin shel acharim amiru. The Betin said, listen, if I have to pay full price, then I'm going to have to pay double. I'm going to have to pay the Sicarii full price, and I'm going to have to pay the original owner full price. I have to pay double for the land. Well, it's very, very hard for people to pay double. And this is the problem. If people don't pay the Sicarii for the land, the Sicarii will keep the land. And now the land of Israel is going to be under the rule of Romans or other non-Jews or wherever else these thugs are. And this is not a good situation. So the rabbis wanted to make sure that the land of Israel, although it was being stolen by these evil people, they want to make sure that the land of Israel will come back into Jewish hands. That was their number one goal, even if not necessarily the original owner from whom it was stolen. Therefore, the rabbi said, if some Sicarii came and stole some Jew's land, and I want to come and buy it, so I have to pay off the Sicarii, because he won't leave, he won't let me take it unless I pay him off, and then I give the original owner only a quarter of the value. Now, this is technically wrong, because the original owner is the rightful owner. Nevertheless, the original owner doesn't have enough money to rebuy his own land, or he's not rebuying his own land, and no one else is going to be able to redeem it for double the price. So therefore, I pay the Sicarii whatever he asks for, and I pay the original owner only a quarter. So although the original owner loses out, so it's really not fair, nevertheless, the rabbi said this is an important takana, so that the land of Israel will go back to Jewish hands. Now, ematai, when does this apply? Bizman she'en biyadan likach, aval yesh biyadan likach, en kodmin lechol adam. This is only if the original owner does not have enough money to purchase it himself. But if he has enough money to purchase it himself, then he gets the first right to buy it, right? So I have to, if I come and says, listen, I'm going to buy it, then the original owner says, no, I'm going to buy it, right? So then the original owner can pay off the Sicarii and get his land back. But if he doesn't, then I have the right to buy it and pay him a quarter. Rabbi Hoshi bet din v'nimnu. A further stage. There's a lot of stages in the history of this law. That Rabbi Yehuda Nasi made a bet din and said, and they voted, v'she'im sha'ata bifnei sikarikon shenem asar chodesh kol hakodem likach zacha aval noten be'alim rebiyah. They said, listen, we're only going to give the original owner 12 months to buy back his land. If the field remains in the hands of the Sicarii for 12 months and the original owner doesn't redeem his own land and pay off the Sicarii, then anyone who comes can go to the Sicarii, get the right to live on the land, pay the original owners just a quarter, and we consider that a rightful sale. And again, this will further encourage people to come after. That's it. 12 months is the max. You better act before that. And otherwise, anyone else can come, and they can negotiate with the Sicarii. All right, that's the law of the Sicarii. Hashta b'harugeh malchut lo haya basikarikon, marugeh malchut ve'elach yesh basikarikon. And now the Gemara asks, this law of the Sicarii, if it didn't apply at the time of the war when people were being killed, then why should it apply after the war was over when people are not being killed anymore? Shouldn't it all the more so apply at the height of the war, when the Sicarii had even more power and were taking more things? So we explain. Amar Rav Yehuda, Lo danu badin sikarikon ka'amar de amar Rabbi Aseh. So when we say Sicarii, see, when you first read the Mishnah, it looks like there were no Sicarii at the time of the people being killed. That doesn't make sense. That the Sicarii were the killers themselves. So of course there were Sicarii at the time of the war. So he explains what we mean to say is that the law of Sicarii did not apply during the war itself. Tekamar Rabbi Aseh. Shalosh gezerot gazru. Gezerta kamaita kol de la katil likteluhu. There were actually three stages in the decrees against the Jews. The first decree was the worst, and that there the authorities said, whoever does not kill a Jew, he will be killed, right? You either pick a side, either you're with us or against us, and all Romans, all non-Jews, you better go kill a Jew, otherwise we'll kill you. So in that case, it was a commandment, authorized, even required by the government to go and kill Jews. So everybody was going and killing Jews and just taking their land, or threatening to kill them to take their land. Mesiata. In the middle, they said, there, so this is already when, probably at the first stage is when, crazy thugs were just basic, almost lawless. The second stage is when, the Roman government came and they put a little bit more order, and they said, you know what, you're not allowed to kill Jews. But if you kill them, you have to pay a fine of 4 zuz, meaning not very much. So therefore, this actually be an encouragement to people to go and threaten to kill a Jew and extract money from them, because if they do kill them, they only have to pay 4 zuz. So it's a good business deal to threaten and take their land. That's the middle stage. The last stage, this is after the war, when things became more orderly, and the government said, anyone who kills a Jew will be killed. This is just a regular law of murder. Even the Roman government, although they're very upset at the Jews who just made a rebellion, but now they put down the rebellion, and they don't want people just murdering each other in the street anymore. So that's the 3 stages. Hilkach kamaita mesiata kevan katle agav unse gamaru makne. In the first 2 stages, since it was easy for non-Jews to kill Jews, so then they would have no problem in threatening a Jew and say, I'll kill you unless you give me your house, and they really would kill them, and if they didn't. Therefore, the Jews fully transferred ownership and said, take my house, I really give it to you, and therefore the Sicarii are now the legal owners of those homes. When it was that stage, there was no law of Sicarii that you only pay a quarter, because and also don't have to pay off the original owner at all, because Sicarii are the legal owners, so someone else can just pay the Sicarii and then it's their house. But Tadaita, however, in the last stage, when things were back to normal, Amri Haidana Lishkol Machar Tabana Le Bidina. In that stage, still there were these thugs that were going and stealing people's homes, but they weren't really going to kill you if you didn't give the home. Therefore, they were still threatening with their knives and taking the legal owners and kicking them out. You're not going to stick around while people are threatening you. But they said, okay, I'll leave my house here. You take it. Tomorrow I'll go to court, because then this is by the aftermath of the war. Things were already somewhat back to normal, and so okay, I'll go to Roman court, and I'll say, hey, this guy stole my house, he's squatting, and I'll get it back. Because of that, they did not have Yeush. They didn't fully transfer ownership to these to the Sicarii, and that's where the legal owner is the original owner. The Sicarii are just sitting and squatting there. That's when the law of the rabbis made as a takana, for the sake of the Yishuv Ha'aretz, so that Jews will acquire the land and remain on their land. That's when they said, listen, even though the rightful owner really deserves full payment, but if we implement that, insist on that, then the land will not be in Jewish hands anymore. And that's when they said, sorry, original owner, but for the sake of the general Jewish community, it's better if the person will pay you a quarter and pay the Sicarii off, and that way it will be back in Jewish hands. And this is the jumping off point for the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story, and the whole story about the destruction of Jerusalem that we will see on the next stuff. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.